2022. Mrs. Camphouse, please call the roll.
Mr. Atwood.
Present.
Mrs. Cole.
Present.
Mrs. Ballard.
Present.
Mrs. Rarica.
Present.
Mr. Taylor.
Present.
All right, I'd like to ask everyone to please stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Spin like a top.
All right, item 3 on our agenda is the adoption of tonight's agenda. I would like to make a motion that we adopt tonight's agenda as written.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Camphouse, please call the roll.
Mr. Atwood.
Yes.
Mrs. Cole.
Yes.
Miss Ballard.
Yes.
Mrs. Rarica.
Yes.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
With our agenda approved, we'll move straight into discussion items. We do have 2 items of discussion for the meeting tonight. The first one is a construction update, and I'd like to give the floor to Mr. John Peter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to start off, and we'll talk about the roof status at the high school. As you know, last week we've had several water intrusions coming through the ceiling of the 4th floor. This occurred as we are working from north to south in the process of replacing the roof. The process is like a 15-20 foot length of roof, the width of the building, and as they tear that off and then add the new roof over what they've just torn off, there's going to be what I call a seam or a trough of where the new roof ended and the old roof is still existing. So we did have a couple of storms, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, where we did get water kind of filling that trough, and the water worked its way under the new roof as well as under the old roof. So we did have some areas, mostly in corridor hallways, where we did have to take down some ceiling tiles, disconnect a few light fixtures that were damaged, and then we put up some buckets and garbage cans or whatever to collect the dripping to prevent the floors from being constantly wet. We did reach out to the roofing contractor to try to get a better idea of how long this will last. We were informed that they're thinking with the best scenario, and hopefully we don't get a whole lot of rain, but hopefully it's finished by, they were saying November 21st or 22nd. So that being said, hopefully we only have a couple more weeks of this. We are noticing that the drips or cans that we're placing out are moving from the north to the south. So we're probably 2/3 the way down the hallway now, and we're just moving it as it happens. The HVAC of the high school, we did get the chiller operational, I think it was either late September or early October. At that point, unfortunately though, we were not so much needing the chiller or cooling tower anymore, but we did get it operational. We got the boiler operational, I believe it was the 2nd week of October. So we did have whatever we needed, whether it was heating or cooling, we were able to get it running that 2nd week or mid-October. I did take a couple of calls, though, work requests of a couple of classrooms from teachers saying that they were too hot. So we ended up turning the boiler off, and it's been off ever since for the last few weeks. We're checking the room temperatures every morning, and nothing is really dropping below 70 degrees. So we're able to maintain a sufficient temperature. If we do notice the temperatures start dropping, we'll turn the boiler right back on again and to make it acceptable. We are able to monitor classrooms, but we are not able to basically control the heat or cooling other than just turning it on or turning it off. That will be sometime down the road. We're thinking by the time we get front end control, it'll probably be sometime in December. But we are able to monitor rooms and know when we should be turning it on or turning it off. So that's what I have for the high school. Here at Williams Avenue, we had quite a few trades here today taking care of some electrical issues. There are some rooms where the lights aren't staying on as long as we'd like, or turning off too soon, or what have you. There's some light fixtures that did not work within a couple weeks after us taking occupancy. The electrician was here today. He got 3 or 4 light fixtures working again, and was able to adjust several rooms to make sure the motion sensors maintain the lights. The fire alarm system has been sending us a couple of random trouble alarms that are not emergencies, but things that they want us to investigate. So we did reach out to the company that got that installed, and they were here for quite a bit today. And the painters were here today doing quite a bit of work. So there was quite a bit today since we didn't have students in the building. They got quite a bit done. They expect to come back again Friday when there won't be anybody here again, so they should be able to get everything wrapped up. We're real close, hopefully by the end of this week. I think that's all I've got. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Peter?
Did you put up any like tarping or anything on the roof to help kind of dissuade some of that water?
What we found as you've got that trough between the new roof and the old roof, the water's just collecting and going underneath
Right.
the new and old. So, yeah, they do have something in place, but as water then gets its way under the tarp, it's still going to find its way there. One thing I did notice this morning was as they were tearing off the next section of the old roof, and I think this afternoon they got the new roof on of the area they tore off this morning, as they took off the old roof, there was a puddle underneath, so they were actually scooping up water that had gotten underneath the old roof. So it's just a process we're going through. Trust me, I sure wish this could have all been addressed over the summer, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way for us.
Any other questions?
And they'll be working extra hard today and Friday when the kids aren't there, the roofing
Oh, yeah.
people.
Absolutely.
Because I have also heard that during the day they're there and it's loud and the rocks are coming down. And I saw some of them too.
So they're working. As long as it's not raining, they're there working. Trying to get it done.
They even work in the evenings, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, they're working well into the night, second shift, to get that done. I do have one question, and it's pertinent to both the high school and Williams. So how is our both internal and external communication? So as we let people know what's happening or what has been done, so that way, nobody likes surprises. So how is our level of communication?
I would like to ask Ms. Akers, I know a couple weeks ago we had an issue with staff being concerned, and I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think you started putting out the agendas from our meetings.
So, Mr. Peter and I, we meet weekly with the construction team on request of the staff to try and keep that line of communication open. We are sending those weekly notes. I take detailed notes and send them to the whole staff each week. Also have directed them, if you have questions from reading some of my copious notes, to please come down and ask me directly if you have a specific thing within your own area that you need me to address. We are in very close contact with each other a lot, I can tell you. We're on speed dial. So even on the weekends, he's in the building doing checks. I'm there at 6, whatever, before students and staff arrive to try and address any problems that I happen to notice before they get there. For the community, obviously, when this flood issue then erupted, we put out, and I know that my high school parents, I put out correspondence to try and clarify exactly where we are so that there is not miscommunication with the community.
All right. Well, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks, we'll get through this, and then that'll be it. Right.
Right, it's right before Thanksgiving break.
It is.
Something to be thankful for.
When, as I've told some of you privately, not all high school students are upset by this because my son's locker is affected on the 4th floor and it's gated off, and he is thoroughly enjoying carrying his backpack. So he doesn't have to go to his locker. So he's fine. If Mr. Peter, you need to keep that area.
My 2 high schoolers, they didn't have a backpack story, but I forget what theirs was, but they also were non-bothered by it at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody just needs to keep in mind that the high school in Williams for a little bit are still active construction sites. So as we finish things up and wind things down, you know, it's still an active work site. And, as much as you like to keep, you know, the trough from filling up with water, to be honest, we've been extremely lucky.
Really have.
Yeah, we had a
Because
drought for a long time.
We had a drought for a long time.
Well, and we
so-
didn't have drywall. If we had drywall back there, that would have been even
Correct.
worse.
Right.
So, if
So-
anybody has ever had water damage, they know it's not an easy thing to deal with. It's not a cheap thing to deal with. And obviously, COVID has caused additional problems for shipping and work orders, everything. It's a mess.
Yeah, had there been no supply chain issues, the roof would have been installed over the summer when nobody was there,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We will all be very happy when this is over.
It wouldn't be construction if you didn't have these kind of things come up. It just wouldn't. If it went smoothly, we'd all get there going, wait a minute,
Right.
wait a minute.
Yeah, I just encourage continued transparency on the construction process, so that way nobody's surprised. If you know, even if something goes awry, just a quick note that says, hey, this happened, this may impact you in X, Y, or Z way. We are sorry, it's an active construction site. Please be patient. So,
And I'd rather have a construction site with a fixed up school than a school that's falling apart, so.
Absolutely.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Akers and Mr. Peter. The second item for discussion on our agenda tonight is the presentation of our November 5-year forecast. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our district treasurer, Mrs. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are reviewing the November 5-year forecast. There's a couple of things I want to talk to you in specific about. One of them is our commercial tax revenues, our state funding guarantees, and our expenditure cliff. We'll talk about those three things in depth tonight. This is a summary statement of our forecast in a graph. The black bars are revenues, the gray bars are expenditures, and the gold line is our cash balance. And so you'll see it starts off with 1 year of history with 2022 last year. The next set of bars is 2023, and then it goes forward through the forecasted years. And so we are receiving more than we are spending at 22, 23, and 24. And then 25, that reverts, and our expenditures become higher than our revenues the last 3 years of the forecast. And so we've pushed off the negative cash flow until the last 3 years of the forecast due to not replacing several staff members that retired. But the main reason, of course, is ESSER funds. We have federal stimulus money that we've been spending for several years, and that has greatly helped the general fund. But it's a temporary basis, and that does expire in 2025. And we will have all of our COVID money spent by then. And all those staff members will come back to the general fund at that time, and that's why we see that cliff. Those expenditures start being higher in 2025. This slide details just our revenues, and I think this is just a significant picture of why things are changing in the district for our cash balance. And the blue bar graph, the plain blue, you'll see our revenues the past 5 years. In 2018, we had some one-time payments that popped those revenues up a little bit, but you'll see 19, 20, 21, and 22, the last 4 years, our revenues have been slowly falling. It's about 100,000 a year, maybe 60,000 a year. One of them's 30,000, I think. But what business can sustain itself with falling revenues? Despite those revenues decreasing just a little bit, you'll see that I have been more optimistic moving forward in the forecast. So in 24, 25, 26, and 27, I do have slight increases in our revenues, our total revenues, mostly based on tax revenue. This is just real estate taxes. And in the dark blue graph, you'll see that for last year, our real estate taxes, 52.8% of our total revenues were real estate taxes, and that grows to just 53% in 2027. You'll also see that revenues have been kind of all over the place for taxes until this year, where we see a decrease, and that is due to some commercial tax payments that did not come in this year. And then 24 through 27, that's where I have our increases planned. I do expect that we'll see some increases in our valuation for the 2023 revaluation year. This graph is just on commercial tax revenue. So we have a couple of commercial taxpayers that have protested their valuation in the Board of Revision claims, and they have won to reduce their valuation. And when that happens, you'll see in Class 2 current down there at the bottom, you'll see that our revenues dropped. This is just for the first half settlement of this year, $470,000. And so that's a significant difference in real estate revenues from one year to the next. And that's just commercial, like I said before. So that has really made me take a second look at our real estate revenues going forward, and our real estate revenues are lower in our November forecast than they were expected to be in our May forecast. This slide talks about just state funding. And our state funding currently, we are only about, our state share is about 26%. Meaning if the state was to give, if they declared that it took $7,000 to educate a child, they would only give us 26% of that $7,000. The rest of it we would have to find on our own and our local share. So you'll see we start off with 2 years of history, and then fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 27 are estimated, and it's just stable. There's just no growth there. In fact, a couple of years it's declining. I will say from fiscal year to 21 to 22, you'll see that there is a decrease in revenue of about a little less than $600,000. But remember, this is a new funding formula that started in fiscal year 22. And in that fiscal year, or in that new funding formula, they also reduced all school choice costs. We don't pay school choice costs. No, public schools do not pay those anymore. It comes directly from the Department of Education's budget. So we saw an offsetting expenditure of $1.5 million on the budget side that really did help us out, even though we saw decreasing revenues on this side. So of our state revenues, a certain portion of them are based on a guarantee. And so the state looks at how many students we have in-house, and they figure the amount that they owe for those students. And then they take that, and this is just a really basic explanation of a very complicated formula. But then they take that amount that they say that they owe for the current students that we have, and they compare it to the prior 2 years of funding that we've received. And if that funding is less, our current funding is less than the prior 2 years, they give us what is called a guarantee payment. And we do have 2 different guarantee payments that we are currently getting paid on. And so when you put those 2 together, you'll see that our guarantee payments this year is about $680,000. Next year it increases to $730,000, and then it goes up each year as we move on. This is based on a couple of assumptions. Assumption is that our student counts are not growing, that they are falling just slightly, not falling as much as our history would show, but just falling about 30 students a year. And so when that happens, our guarantee payments are increasing, but our total state funding is staying the same. So just that guarantee payment is becoming more dear to us and more important to us. Now, the problem with the guarantee payment is that only one of them is in permanent law, and the other one is spelled out in the two-year biennial budget. So at this time, I don't have any reason to think that the state is going to start reducing the guarantee payments, but they could do that in the next biennial budget. I've not heard anything about that. Of course, the state's finances are very strong, so there really is no reason for them to cut school district funding, but that doesn't really mean anything sometimes. So I do not have any cuts to the guarantee in the forecast at this time. As I said, I don't see any indications that the state will cut us at this time. The good news on our revenue side is investment revenues. So the Federal Reserve has raised the federal interest, or the short-term borrowing rate. It's actually 3.75% in the last 6 months, because we just had another 75 basis point increase last week. You can tell I did this the week before. And so then they're going to probably announce another rate hike in December, maybe of 50 basis points. And so this is unheard of increases on the investment side. And so our interest rates have increased incredibly since the May forecast. And I'm expecting those increases in interest rates to show an interest revenue for us. And you'll see in that blue bar graph just how much I expect those to increase. I think 2022 says 95,000, and then this year I expect it to be 422,000. So this alone, interest revenues alone, are helping it so that we don't feel the pain of that commercial tax payment loss. Mr. Powell of the Federal Reserve did say that he hopes to see these interest rates continue for quite a while. It's not a short-term policy. He wants to see them increase until inflationary period is very much improved, not just slightly improved. So I do have it increasing our revenues for quite a couple of years. It does decrease again in the last couple of years of the forecast, because interest rates will probably fall, maybe because of a recession, but also because our cash balance is declining. So we will have less money to invest, which of course means we'll have less investment revenue. On the expenditure side, in the colorful part of the graph, you'll see in 2027 that salaries and benefits will consume 80% of our total budget, which is not sustainable for a public school. In addition to that, you'll have to remember that on the purchase services side, we also have our cleaning staff and our transportation staff are paid out of purchase services, as we don't have those in-house. So if we were to include those costs in here, we would be quite a bit over 80%, which is high, very high. Unlike revenues, expenses continue to grow starting in 2024 and 2025 with the expiration of our ESSER grant and all those costs coming back to the general fund. This graph is just on payroll, and I think it shows really well just the effect of our ESSER grant and how much that has really helped us save money in 2022 and 2023, a little bit in 2021, and then some in 2024. And then you'll see in 2025 through 2027, all of the staff members that were being paid out of the ESSER grant, which of course is federal stimulus money for COVID purposes, will be coming back to the general fund. Currently this year we have 24 staff members being paid out of ESSER that typically would come from the general fund. So as I said in the past, ESSER can only be used for a couple of things. Actually, there are 14 reasons that you can spend ESSER money, and one of those reasons is to avoid COVID transmission, And that is why we have some of our classified staff members coming from that, because they were a great help in reducing the spread of COVID. And then our teaching staff are the only ones that can really help us overcome that learning loss from the COVID years. And so they qualify to be taken from ESSER also. This is purchase services, and you'll see the decline from 21 to 22. That's where the state changed the funding formula and removed school choice costs coming from the school districts instead coming from ODE. You'll see that deep discount. 1.5 of that was just in school choice costs. This category now includes costs like utilities, contracted cleaning and transportation costs, and special ed contracts. And finally, the bottom line. This is the last slide. And the areas that I have circled are the dollar figures to the graph that I showed in the first slide. So in fiscal year 2025, with no changes in the forecast, we'll be spending 1.1 million more than we bring in. And it goes to 2.3 and then to 3.1 the final year of the forecast. Of course, I like to say with no changes, because of course we're going to make changes. We have plans to reduce costs. This forecast has none of those plans included in it, because the plans are just plans. There's nothing set in stone yet, but we will be making some changes so that we can balance our budget and bring all the staff members back into the general fund. Another thing I think it's really important to say is that in 2022, our days cash, meaning how many days can we exist without further revenue, we were at 202 days of cash. In 2027, we will only have 92 days cash. The board has set a policy for a cash balance of 90 days cash. So the last year of the forecast will be really close to that minimum cash balance. But as I said prior, we'll be making changes so that we can look at those last 3 years of the forecast and get balanced before that time comes. Are there any questions about the forecast? I know I went through it really fast.
No, I just want to make one clarifying statement, especially in this slide, in 2027 on the 92 days of the cash balance. So what happens when we hit the 90-day threshold? Our board policy states that the administration, specifically the superintendent and the treasurer, has to present to the board a plan in order to keep us above 90 days of cash balance. Mm-hmm. So that's what it means when we hit that threshold. Is we have to be presented with something that says this is how we're going to keep ourselves above this level and at least tread water. So, but getting to 92 days within a 5-year forecast, I mean, getting close to that, it's pretty scary.
It is. And I would like to say too, just the purpose of the 90 days minimum cash, we said in 2027 we'd be at 92 days, which is close enough, but that's $8.3 million, which sounds like, a lot of money. But when you think about it, in May, 95% of our staff go home for the summer, and we owe them 3 months of wages and benefits, which is 80% of our budget. And so that balance doesn't seem so high anymore when you consider the fact that we owe them that. We should be able to pay out their 3 months contract without using future revenues.
Yeah. I would like to state that when Ms. Ballard and I came onto the board, that policy was only 30 days.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't have a cushion that was over 200 like that consistently active in our recent history. Mm-hmm. So the fact that, yes, this is in the 5-year forecast, yes, it's going to be something we work on, but the fact that it's that far out, we have time to impact it. It's not like, oh crap, what are we doing? Mm-hmm. So right. I'm very proud of the way that we have handled our finances, the work that you and your team have done to keep us with this kind of cushion and information to give us that big of a window to work with. I know it's concerning, but I'm gonna say I'm not worried, because I know what your team is capable of, and I know what this board is capable of.
I will take credit for the talking about this, but I cannot take credit for the ending balance, because that ending cash balance is just due to ESSER. Because if we did not have that ESSER grant, we'd be spending into our carryover this year, next year, this year and last year, excuse me. So the cash balance is from the ESSER savings that we've seen from those federal stimulus dollars. So,
I've seen
but
some
thank
schools,
you.
though, some schools blew through that
Yes.
irresponsibly and didn't have that kind of cushion. The way we have spent it and the way we stretched those dollars to bring us out of that previous issue that we were having.
Yes,
And it set us up to have time to fix a plan.
that is correct. We did. We used, well, as wisely as you can use it. It was very startling when we first found the amount that we were going to get. But, we did use some of it to help the general fund out. And we've used quite a bit of it for large purchases that are going to make long-term improvements to the district, with roofs and helping with the HVAC systems and things like that too. So we've tried to spread it around to some very smart areas.
I think when I was coming on, we were on the cliff, right? We were on that cliff, and then COVID happened, and no one wants COVID or anything that brought, but it brought us 5 years. Like, it's crazy to think about that.
You're right. We were all talking about the cliff.
And we were like, this is what we have to do, and it was all very concerning, and now we're like, wow.
It delayed it three more years, so thankfully for that.
Well, we were lucky in a unique position that not a lot of districts were in that we had a past permanent improvement levy
Yes.
sitting there, and then we were in the middle of a district-wide building renovation, right? So when the ESSER fund started rolling in and you were limited as to what you could spend all of those dollars on, of the 16 things, we hit all of the boxes because we were doing them at the time. So it did allow us an opportunity because, to your point, districts were spending irresponsibly because, they weren't hitting all the boxes. And we had all the boxes because we were doing all the things already. So, yeah.
And I just want to add, please pay attention when Julie shows us about the state funding to the public. I know you guys see it because we talk about it all the time, but when Julie says the state's giving us less and less money, and today is voting day and we needed to vote on a state representative and a state Senate person, you've got to make sure that who you're voting for supports public schools, or they're going to vote to keep giving us less money. Oh, and our state school board person. That is very important. Just because someone runs for state school board doesn't mean that they care about public schools. It's really important to find out.
Any other questions for Mrs. Campos? We're going to move on. Section 5 in our agenda is personnel, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Superintendent Roman.
Thank you, President Atwood. 5.01 employment, we would like to welcome Teresa Crew. She's going to be our new student assistant aide at Bobby Fairfax. Item number 2 is Avenues for Success, a Sharpsburg teacher liaison. So we're welcoming Renisha Barker. Number 3 is a stipend for our AD because we've had so many rentals recently for Shea Stadium and other places, but mostly Shea. Number 4, it's an increase in student wages. These are our student workers in our MH program, and I think it's been incredibly low for many, many years, like $1.25. We really do need to pay them more. Yeah, I don't think, it was just overlooked over time, and we caught it, and we're making it right. Number 5 is supplemental, thanks to Joe Walkett, who is our assistant marching band director part-time. And number 6, these are our pupil activity contracts for our classified staff, and also our avenues for success, our site staff. And right before I conclude my report, I do have a copy of Cincinnati Magazine over there where our football team is featured. I know that our AD sent that out, but it's lovely to actually see it in print. So that concludes my report, the personnel report. Thank you.
All right, any questions regarding personnel? Nope, we'll move on to item 6 on our agenda. This is the Education Committee, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Board Member Ms. Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 2 student field trips up for submission for next week. The first is our silhouettes going to competition at Northern Kentucky University, and the second is Norwood View's first grade will be going to the Great Parks Nature Center. And that concludes my report.
Any questions regarding the upcoming field trips? No, thank you, Ms. Ballard. We'll move on to item 7 on our agenda, the Policy Committee report, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Vice President Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President, and as usual for committee, I will turn the floor over to Mrs. Jessen.
Thank you, Vice President. We have 6 policies this evening and 1 regulation. The first policy is BDDG, which is a minutes policy. So we have 1 clarifying 2 words we're adding to that policy in the line that talks about when we create the minutes following approval of the minutes by the board, instead of saying next meeting, we're saying next regularly scheduled meeting, so that there won't be a scurry in case we call a special meeting. So it won't change too much of won't change any of our work, but it just acknowledges that it's the next regularly scheduled meeting that the minutes would become available. The next policy is EBC, the Emergency Management and Safety Plan policy. And this policy, we've looked at this policy a year ago in 2021, but they've added some new changes to it in regard to House Bill 99 and House Bill 123. Both of those House bills affected this policy and how the work is done. You may remember that there was a slight change before about who we shared our emergency plans with. That change remains, that it goes to the Director of Public Safety, so that will continue. And now our plan will be provided to the Regional Mobile Training Officer upon request. So that is something new. That's a newly created position, and it's a new opportunity for us to share our plans. In this policy, the terminology of what districts are to include in these emergency management plans has increased. Now there are new references to infectious disease, pandemic, severe weather, threats of violence, or human-caused events. Those have been added in as to things that our emergency plan shall include moving forward. They've added the Ohio Mobile Training Team and the School Safety Crisis Center in this work, and some new components of this work, although they're not explicitly stated in this policy, they're embedded in the rules and the House bills moving forward. So the superintendent, Mrs. Ronan, is in lead of this work, so she is keenly aware of all the requirements that we have to submit, and annually we review this work and we certify the accuracy of this work, and then we file it appropriately and let the key people that are required to see this work be able to review it, of course including local fire and law enforcement in that plan as well. So that's the Emergency Management and Safety Plan. The next,
Christine, before you go on, I also want to add, we also have to improve our threat assessment plan that we're adopting from the state. I don't believe it's attached, but I'll make sure it's added tomorrow so you can see it, because that also has to be added. It's just the copy should be attached, and I don't see it attached on here, or maybe I just missed it. It's the 20-page plan.
I think they requested that remain private, but we can clarify that again. OSBA said that goes with your plan and it's submitted privately, but I'm not sure. That doesn't sound right?
It doesn't sound right.
So we'll double check it.
Yeah, this doesn't have anything about building security, and it's another something else they've added.
Okay.
So
it
I'll
gets
attach
bigger
it.
and bigger each year is the
Yes.
bottom line.
It's hard to keep track of all the pieces.
thankfully, Mrs. Ronan is keeping tabs on all of it. The next change goes to GBCB, and that's staff conduct. And that goes along with the emergency plan, just adding some legal references that were changes from House Bill 99. So nothing direct, no words were changed in that particular policy. Moving on, we will see that interscholastic extracurricular eligibility has come forward again. You might say, well, we just looked at that, and we did. We have new understanding now. Everything we've done previously is correct, but Ohio Revised Code has actually asked Board of Education for them to add specificity of what the grade point average will be, and if a student is in probationary period, what that really would look like for each board. So each board is able to determine that. So in working with our athletic director and the high school in particular, we have indicated what our grade point average, what the minimum requirement for our grade point average will be, and then eligibility for our particular high school, and any probationary work that students would be a part of, or weekly academic eligibility as requested from Ohio Revised Code. So everything we did previously was accurate, but this detail is now being requested as well.
I have a question about that.
Uh-huh.
So they dropped the grade point average of 2 down to 1.0.
So that is the minimum requirement from Ohio, so that is our allowable requirement. It doesn't mean that we want students who participate to maintain that, but that allows us to allow every student potentially possible to be a part of our athletic, any kind of extracurricular athletic event. And then, of course, in theory, when you're part of a team, your grade point goes up and you work on things. But we do believe that with the eligibility for the weekly academic checks, that we can be more supportive of students if they were not a part of these extracurriculars. So that's the reason
Well, I wanted to make sure they lined up, because I remember that the board set a standard with that program, with the, when we have to check in with a student to make sure they're on homework or probationary guidance, that is this going to mess up that plan? I don't want it to. I don't want them to feel like bare minimum is what is acceptable. I want our team to be as good off the field as they should be on the field. And I want to make sure that standard is held.
Embedded in the policy is the opportunity, if a grade point average falls below a higher amount than 1.0, like even a 1.5, that they are required to attend study tables. So all of those measures are in there to help support the students, so they can say, like, school is important, extracurriculars are important, we want you to be a part of it. We have to do both to be a part of both events and to achieve where you want to achieve.
This just gets them eligible to be able to try out and give them a starting point.
Yeah, and again, the hope is that with more adults paying a particular attention to them in different ways than even their teachers during the day, or counselors, or even principals, that the coaching has a unique relationship with the athlete, or the marching band director, the same thing. That unique relationship allows them to say, like, hey, in this sport we do this, in this marching band we perform this way, but we also are scholars as well. So that's the hope. And it is in keeping with what the athletic department and director would like to have the board support in moving forward.
Yeah, and so we've been monitoring teams' GPA ever since we originally changed it. And so from my understanding, it's like a little over 3.0 is what the team's GPA, the average is, as an aggregate across. And which I think is fantastic. So even though we're following OSHA's guideline to have eligibility, right, our student athletes are still doing what's necessary to be good scholars in the classroom, and not just doing the bare minimum, right? But it's there for, that one child who's may not come to school, right? That's who we're trying to save with this. Is the kid that, the only reason why I'm here is to do this, and without that, why come? Right. So.
Yeah, your points are well taken, both of yours. The next policies are two policies and one regulation connected together. So KMA, which is the policy about, the old policy about parent organizations, it now has a new terminology. So in essence, they've combined KMA, which is the parent organization policy, with KMB, which is the booster organization policy. So knowing that it's really important to have strong relationships with all of our support organizations, and in order to have good working relationships, it's important to have some rules and guidance. That's why they looked closely at these two policies and combined them into one, using the best language from both. We think that moving forward, having the board approve the organization allows for the support organization to bear the name of Norwood and our mascot in all of their work. And so this language has been combined in both these policies and renamed Relations with Support Organizations. That is the new KMA. While we're embracing that new name change and that combination, we will ask the board to rescind KMB because it won't be necessary moving forward. They will become one. And so boosters, it won't be just called booster organizations, and it won't be called parent organizations. It will just be called support organizations. So you'll see a lot of the best of both of those policies combined as you glance through those. Along with that, they have asked us to adopt a regulation because it just gives more specific guidance moving forward. Coordinating the goals and the fundraising plans, it allows for good accounting and management and for the documents annually to be sent to the superintendent or designee. We have added, they made a recommendation and we've added 3 different parts to this. When Mrs. Camphouse reviewed it, she wanted us to have a few more things in it, so we've added in with our own local decision-making certification that they are a 501c3 designated entity, and that all the donated supplies and materials and equipment that they would receive would become property of Norwood City School District. And the group may not build or modify any of our buildings in the district. So those were important to our work moving forward. And like all regulations, this will just guide the work as we work with all of our support organizations moving forward. And those are our 6 policies and 1 regulation for your consideration for month number 1 for the first reading, and then next month for the second reading. Are there any other questions?
So these are some massive changes.
We're following a lot of the rules already for the PTA, PTOs, and the boosters. We were until COVID hit. We took a couple of year hiatus, but we were having them do all these regulations for that one. So that's the last 3. But I appreciate now actually having a document that says why I'm doing it, because that's always been the best case scenario of how to have a booster group or a PTA, how to have it so that they're protecting their assets and how they're working within the school district's parameters for what the school district wants.
No, I get that.
Oh,
But we're classifying all of these groups now as just support organizations, where they have unique functions.
They are, but they basically run by the same rules.
I think where the language comes from is the fact that when they do declare themselves a 501c3, they do so in the name of the district. So when they fill out that paperwork, they're saying they are a support organization dedicated to Norwood City Schools. I think that's where that's coming from.
It is on the tax form.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're not changing the name of the boosters or anything.
Are there any support organizations, as this new policy states, not a 501c3 that we work with?
I do believe we do have one that I still need to work on.
Okay.
The Silhouettes boosters, we're still trying to work on that a while back.
Silhouettes is
Did they get theirs?
501c3. They need to
Yeah.
work on the Attorney General designation. But it's one of our PTAs, I think. But this gives me teeth to
Correct. Okay.
to do the work. I do see that, I put in here equipment, all donated supplies and material and equipment become the property of Norwood City School District, I need to emphasize that that is donated, because of course.
That's what I was about to ask.
I know, I could see your face. I knew you were.
It doesn't say donated?
It does say donated. I need to
Okay.
emphasize
So
that.
if you're using it, that's not donation.
No,
So they can own their own property. They
Like
can
all the
own their
stuff in the
own
stadium
equipment.
is. Okay,
Yeah.
Just the stuff that give us becomes our.
gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
And it still has the same guidelines, like, a staff member or, person can't be in charge of it, like, without board approval. So there's still the same type of guidelines that we were already running by. Like, it's
Yeah,
all built
in essence, they have to declare that they're, they have a president, a vice president, a treasurer. They have to,
Right.
follow these rules. They have to show us proof that they're doing these things once a year. So it's not too intrusive, but it does emphasize that they should be a professional organization.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other questions regarding policies? Nope. All right. Thank you for that. We'll move on our agenda. Section 8, Building and Grounds Committee, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Board Member Mrs. Rarica.
Thank you. We have a request for our pool from Summit Country Day for November and February. And we have Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity wants to use Shea Stadium for a flag football game.
All right. So our pool's becoming quite busy.
Yeah.
For Summit Country Day, what time do we practice?
Actually, a lot of times Summit is in there, I thought, in the mornings
Oh, no.
prior to this.
So,
Really?
so we have Seven Hills in there practicing now, right? And then we're practicing in there, and now, Summit's on the agenda from 4:30 to 6:30, and then we host probably 90% of our swim meets. I think there's only 2 that we travel to. So,
I will find out.
yeah.
I will get on that.
And we'll make adjustments before next Thursday,
Yes.
because this does look excessive.
Yeah.
Because that's tying it up 5 days a week.
Right. Any other questions? No? All right, we'll move on to Section 9 in our agenda, and that's the Finance Committee. I'd like to turn the floor over to District Treasurer Mrs. Campos.
Thank you, Mr. President. 9.01, financial reports, the CFO report, financials, and the change order listings are attached for your review and approval next week. 9.02, permanent appropriations, our budget for the year. 9.03, amended official certificate of estimated resources. Our amended expected revenues for the current year to reflect our new forecast. 9.04, the forecast and the assumptions for your review and approval next week. Forecasts are due to Ohio Department of Education by the end of November. 9.05, resolution to request a modified tax budget. So we have used a modified tax budget for the past several years, as it reflects our current financials better than the traditional one. This resolution allows us to continue that process of a modified tax budget. 9.06, Klinger surveys. These are surveys of both Sharpsburg, Views, and Williams's campus properties in order to have correct boundary lines for the beautification and playground projects. 9.07, then and now purchase order that needs further approval. 9.08, a donation from $100 from our Norwood Alumni Association to the Montessori Garden Project. 9.09, lot plan estimates. So last month we talked about Sharpsburg Primary and Williams's lot plans and the scope of work. This month I'm bringing to you Sharpsburg Elementary and View Elementary. Their lot plans, the scope of work, including estimated costs, are included for your review. These plans for both beautification and playground changes are mostly just updates. No large-scale changes are expected, so I will not present them in public session unless you ask me to, and then I will. Please do review the plans and let me know if you have any questions or concerns before next week. 9.10, approval of the scope for the following projects. Williams and View, both need a roof replacement estimated at $524,000 for Williams and $750,000 for View. The high school boilers replacement is estimated at $170,000. These projects will be paid for with ESSER dollars, our federal stimulus grant, as timing and budget allows. And then last in that group is a security project. So, we received the state security grant of $250,000. We talked about that a couple of months ago. We are setting our priorities on this project to expand exterior door card access points, more than doubling our swipe doors access points, to purchase and install a warning system for ajar non-card access doors, and finally for security VMS upgrades for instructional buildings. So the VMS upgrades are the hardware and software needed that makes the security cameras work. And then, of course, the state security grant will pay for a portion of these projects. The rest of it will come out of PI funds or levy funds, whatever we have available at that time. So with us approving these, we'll be setting our priorities for the next year on what our major projects are going to be this next year. And then after that's over, we'll decide what we have to do next, but it'll be a much smaller scale.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions about any of the finance items? All right, item 10 on our agenda, and this is something that we'll need to address next week. This is the Great Oaks Career Campus Governing Board appointment. So we'll have to nominate a candidate to serve a 3-year term. The current candidate serving is Ballard. He's doing a fantastic job with that. So, but we will take care of that at next week's meeting. Any questions regarding that?
Is anyone else interested in taking that seat?
I don't know. Anyone here
That's
interested?
what I was gonna ask. Is there any inclination to not have Amber do it? Or is there other? Are we going to be surprised next week? No?
I don't know. I don't want to do it.
Okay.
I don't want to do it.
So, any other discussion? All right, last item on our meeting agenda is adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.